Disturbing movies usually leave an impression of shock or disgust, maybe a lingering feeling of dread or sadness. But after a good night's rest, or two, you tend to move on. Rarely does a film leave you feeling haunted, plagued with guilt or remorse, a pain you yourself did not endure. When those films do come along, however, they cling to you for days after the credits roll. The Coffee Table takes a mundane day and slowly warps it into a horrific nightmare. While the central event is exaggerated, it feels real enough to shake you to your core. The momentum of distress never eases, only a constant, suffocating sense of anguish and guilt. Modern horror rarely leaves an impact like this, at least in my opinion, and it's strangely refreshing to see something so haunting, so relentlessly dreadful, emerge from the genre. A couple has recently welcomed a baby into the world, a time usually associated with joy and intimacy. Instead, the added responsibility only amplifies the strain in their already rocky relationship. While shopping for a coffee table, we're given an early glimpse into how easily small disagreements spiral into conflict. The husband wants a gaudy, ugly table, while the wife vehemently opposes it. The tension is worsened by the seedy salesman who insists the table will bring happiness and boasts that it's unbreakable, all while casually insulting the couple. In one particularly haunting shot, the couple's reflection stares back at them from the glass table's surface as the salesman remarks, "A marriage can break." When the wife storms out, Jesus chooses to buy the table anyway, admitting he wants it purely out of pride, despite the salesman himself claiming he wouldn't own it. This single spite-driven decision becomes the first step towards Jesus's complete undoing. Returning home with the table, tensions are high. As Jesus assembles it, he discovers that it's missing a vital screw, one meant to hold the glass top in place. Frustrated, he leans the glass against the base and calls the salesman, demanding that he brings the missing piece that day. Maria needs time for herself and leaves to buy groceries in preparation for dinner with Jesus's brother and his girlfriend. This leaves Jesus alone with their infant son, Cayetano, something that doesn't seem to happen often. And as the baby cries, Jesus cruelly remarks how awful his name is. The film is steeped in religious allegory, beginning with the names Jesus and Maria themselves. Cayetano's name feels intentionally out of place by comparison. While his parents carry traditionally religious names, their son's feels modern and socially coded, clashing with the values in life the couple appears to uphold. Even Jesus' struggle to carry the table up the long flight of stairs echoes Christ bearing the cross, the difference being that Christ understands his fate, while Jesus remains oblivious to the life-altering event about to unfold. Unfortunately, this is where the film crosses the line from anxiety-inducing into something far more dreadful, so consider this your warning. As Jesus attempts to comfort his son, telling Cayetano how much he loves him, he decides to show him the new coffee table. Then off-screen, the glass top falls, decapitating the baby. The aftermath is overwhelming. Blood fills the room and Jesus stands frozen, his face locked in shock as he stares at the unthinkable before him. When he finally moves, he pulls a large shard of glass from the back of his hand, barely reacting to the pain. In a moment of complete dissociation, he picks up his son's body and changes his diaper, desperately attempting to restore some sense of normalcy. The scene is devastating. Cayetano's cries fill the room as Jesus tries to soothe him, until they abruptly stop. It's jarring and deeply heartbreaking, with Jesus' expression mirroring exactly what the audience feels. Pure horror. Once again, the film draws a parallel between Jesus and Christ. The wound in Jesus' hand echoes depictions of the crucifixion, where nails pierce Christ's palms, his injury deep, bloody, and symbolic of a suffering he never chose, yet is now forced to bear. In the immediate aftermath, Maria calls Jesus twice. Once to talk with a friend she ran into at the store, and again to ask his opinion on the decision she's trying to make. Unable to engage, Jesus simply agrees with whatever she says. At this moment, he seems to accept a complete loss of autonomy within his marriage, as though the tragedy has stripped him of the right to assert himself at all. Desperate to hide what's happened, Jesus begins frantically cleaning the apartment. He places the baby's body in his crib and can't bring himself to touch his son's head, which lies under a chair. Lacking supplies, he goes to a neighboring unit. home to a woman and her 13-year-old daughter Ruth, both of whom were briefly introduced earlier. Ruth harbors a crush on Jesus, convinced that they're secretly in love and that he needs to confess this to Maria. When Jesus weakly agrees to do so, Ruth threatens to tell Maria herself, only stopping when her mother sends her to retrieve cleaning supplies for him. Ruth's name is no coincidence. In the Bible, Ruth is a symbol of loyalty, devotion, and faith, a woman defined by her commitment to family. The film's Ruth is a bitter inversion of that image. Rather than loyalty, she exhibits obsession, rather than devotion, manipulation. She exploits Jesus' fractured marriage and emotional instability, inserting herself into his life at the worst possible moment. Though she appears in only a handful of scenes, her presence is oppressive, her demeanor never gentle or comforting, only intrusive. When Jesus returns to the apartment, the salesman arrives with the missing screw. He casually admits to taking it from another table after Jesus insisted on getting his that same day, the camera lingering on the screw itself as though it's mocking him. The salesman offers to help assemble the table, stressing the importance of tightening the screws properly and calling the table almost unbreakable, quietly contradicting his earlier promises. Jesus refuses the help and tries to end the interaction, but the salesman presses on, launching into a pitch about the store having a giveaway and promising he can guarantee Jesus a win. Despite Jesus repeatedly saying no, the salesman fills out the entry form anyway, using Jesus' back as a writing surface. He even offers a prayer as he does so, asking if Jesus is religious in regard to the email given, an invitation Jesus deflects with a simple, "not really." One final attempt at friendship follows before Jesus abruptly slams the door, forced to maintain the illusion that everything inside the apartment is fine. It's worth noting that the salesman's name is also Cayetano, a detail I've intentionally saved until now. This shared name between Jesus' infant son and the salesman not only serves as irony, it also links him to the tragedy of the infant. The salesman functions as a tempter, someone who makes false promises, oversells certainty, and pushes Jesus toward decisions that serve his own interests. His arrival feels almost knowing, his emphasis on properly fastening the screws reading less like concern and more like a cruel reminder of Jesus' fatal mistake. His attempts to bond, through religion, material reward, or friendship, mirror temptation itself. Like the devil's offers to Christ, these promises seem generous on the surface, but each one pulls Jesus further away from what truly matters in that moment. Jesus returns to the apartment and continues cleaning what he can, though some evidence of the accident remains. Not just stains, but his son's severed head, lodged beneath the chair, something he's unable to bring himself to retrieve. When Maria returns home, Jesus steps out onto the balcony. He watches children playing below and briefly contemplates jumping before ultimately returning inside to let her in. Maria immediately notices the bloodstains on the carpet and chair and asks to see Cayetano. Jesus reassures her that the baby is sleeping and insists she shouldn't disturb him, claiming the blood is his own, that the table broke when he was handling it. As they begin preparing lunch, Maria laughs hysterically at the idea of the table breaking, wishing she'd been there to see it, even remarking that buying it was worth it for this moment alone. The irony is brutal. Maria repeatedly asks to see the baby, and each time Jesus deflects, reassuring her that everything is fine. In the nursery, he quietly asks for forgiveness, only for his brief relief to collapse as he looks into the crib. Later, as they continue preparing lunch, Maria hears a dripping sound through the baby monitor. Jesus says he knows what it is and heads to the nursery, the camera panning beneath the crib to reveal blood seeping through and dripping onto the floor below. Jesus is drowning in guilt, fully aware of how utterly devastating this truth will be for Maria. Despite his lies, his actions feel driven by a desperate attempt to earn her forgiveness before she even knows what's happened. The couple had struggled for years to conceive, and Jesus understands just how much this child means to her. Maria's reaction to the table breaking is strange as well, her laughter feeling misplaced, almost hysterical, as if she senses something is wrong but refuses to acknowledge it. Whether intentional or not, her reaction reads as a cruel mirror to Jesus' internal torment, unintentionally taunting him as he continues to pretend nothing has happened. Jesus' brother Carlos arrives for lunch with his 18-year-old girlfriend Cristina. Jesus' internal torment is immediately apparent in his behavior, drawing comments from both Maria and Carlos. When they notice the bloodstains in the apartment, Maria explains what happened, prompting Carlos to casually mention that toothpaste can remove blood, something he learned from watching true crime documentaries. The remark lands with cruel irony. As Maria and Cristina step away to look at Cayetano's room, filled with childhood toys belonging to Jesus and Carlos, Carlos asks if Ruth has been bothering Jesus again. Jesus deflects, promising to explain later. Inside the nursery, Carlos reminisces about breaking Jesus' favorite toy as a child, recalling how Jesus didn't speak to him for 6 months afterward. The story hangs in the air, an unintentional echo of what's just occurred. Back at the table, lunch begins, but every detail becomes unbearable for Jesus. The decor, the wine, the food. He drifts further into dissociation, overwhelmed by constant reminders of what he's done. The conversation turns fatal when Cristina asks who they love most. Maria answers without hesitation, the baby, describing a love unlike any other. Jesus says he loves Maria most. She gently corrects him, saying it should be Cayetano. To ease the sudden tension, Carlos and Cristina encourage the couple to kiss. Jesus obliges, lingering far too long, the gesture less affectionate than desperate. The people closest to Jesus are already sensing that something is wrong, and he knows he can't conceal it forever. Every offhand comment, every innocent memory, cuts deeper, unintentional reminders that push him closer to psychological collapse. Carlos's remarks about blood and broken toys sting not just for their irony, but for how precisely they mirror the accident itself. And through it all, Jesus remains fixated on one thing above everything else: earning Maria's forgiveness. Even now, even at this table, his love for her feels like a plea for absolution, not understanding. The lunch ends abruptly when Carlos lets slip that Cristina is pregnant. Jesus doesn't respond at first. Pressured by Maria to say something, he finally does, coldly remarking that it's no surprise Carlos got her pregnant, that he'll grow to regret it, admitting that he himself regrets buying the table. Jesus excuses himself and retreats to the bathroom, leaving everyone stunned. At the table, Maria apologizes profusely to Cristina as Carlos goes to check on his brother. He finds Jesus recording a video confession on his phone, addressed to Maria, explaining what's happened and admitting he can't bring himself to tell her in person, begging for forgiveness. When Carlos asks what's wrong, Jesus leads him to the nursery. Carlos sees the body in disbelief and asks where the baby's head is. Though shaken, he tells Jesus he wants to help and urges him not to act on his end-of-life impulses. Cristina knocks at the door. Carlos sends her away and tells Jesus they have 10 minutes before Maria needs to feed the baby. The time constraint sends Jesus into further panic, but Carlos remains composed, insisting Maria cannot see the child in this state and telling Jesus to follow his lead. Jesus grows increasingly agitated and hostile, the pressure finally beginning to fracture him. Cristina's pregnancy announcement becomes another reminder of the future stolen from his own family, one that can never exist now, not only because Cayetano is dead, but because Jesus knows Maria will never stay with him after the truth comes out. He repeatedly circles the idea of deleting himself from the server, convinced that his existence will only destroy her. With Carlos now aware of what's happened, the burden of guilt is no longer his alone, but that knowledge only deepens the sense of impending doom. Carlos wants to protect his younger brother, yet there's nothing he can truly do except delay the inevitable and soften the moment when Maria finally learns the truth. Jesus and Carlos emerge from the nursery just as Maria lets Ruth into the apartment, her dog in tow. Ruth is insistent on speaking to both of them, and as the group gathers in the dining room, Maria presses Jesus about why Ruth is there, and about the kiss Ruth claims they shared. Before Jesus can respond, the dog begins sniffing beneath the chair and starts barking. Panic spreads across Jesus and Carlos's faces. As Maria demands Ruth to quiet the dog, Carlos moves toward the chair. When Ruth pulls the animal away, its muzzle is stained with blood. Carlos slowly reaches beneath the chair, his expression collapsing into horror. When Maria asks what he's holding, he pleads with her, tears streaming down his face, to leave the apartment with Christina, insisting she doesn't need to see this. Ruth, however, does see it, bluntly identifying what Carlos is holding: her son's head. The room erupts into chaos and despair. Ruth screams, Christina vomits, Jesus collapses into catatonia, and Maria's grief becomes unbearable as she finally understands what's happened. Maria takes Cayetano's head from Carlos, her expression hollow and resolute. She walks towards the balcony as the camera pans away, first to Jesus, then back to the balcony doors, now empty. Moments later, police gather outside the apartment building. They speak matter-of-factly about the incident. A couple has died and their infant son was decapitated. One officer mentions witnesses, but notes that only one is coherent enough to speak, and he keeps repeating a single phrase: the coffee table. As the police car drives away with Carlos inside, the film shows a final image of Jesus and Maria standing together with Cayetano beside the coffee table. It's really difficult to overstate how suffocating this sequence is. Ruth's arrival feels almost mythic, as though she's not just a character, but a harbinger, bringing the truth into the open and detonating the fragile lie Jesus has been desperately maintaining. Every reaction is devastating in its own way, the culmination of secrecy, guilt, and denial finally erupting into irreversible trauma. Though the film never explicitly shows Jesus' fate, the implication is clear. He can't exist without Maria, nor without her forgiveness. The final image is hauntingly serene, a cruel, imagined reconciliation. Jesus has the coffee table he wanted. Maria has Cayetano. Together they stand in a vision of domestic harmony that can never exist in reality. It's not a happy ending, but a bitter fantasy. A final, unbearable what if. The Coffee Table is a brutal film to endure, not because of supernatural forces or sadistic killers, but because its horror is rooted in guilt, consequence, and the unbearable weight of one's own actions. The film traps you in a purgatory of deceit, dissociation, and desperate longing for forgiveness. Even without recognizing the biblical allegory or layered irony, it latches onto you, leaving a lingering sense of anxiety and remorse long after it ends. Though it's labeled as a black comedy, engaging with that label requires a very specific headspace. Some humor is subtle, like the PA announcement about discounted absorbent paper towels while Maria shops, while other moments are more overt, such as Christina remarking that Cayetano's room looks like something out of Stranger Things. These moments don't undercut the horror, though. Instead, they deepen the discomfort, forcing laughter to coexist with dread. Ultimately, I see The Coffee Table as a profoundly disturbing film, one that stays with you for days because it feels painfully human. The central event may be a bit outlandish, but it's really not impossible, and the way Jesus responds to it feels terrifyingly real. His attempts to hide the truth, driven by his own prideful decision and desperation to regain his autonomy within his marriage, reflect how easily someone can lose sight of what truly matters in the moment. I genuinely love this film, despite how miserable it makes me feel. The performances are incredible, the story is harrowing, and the camera work is strikingly deliberate, emphasizing exactly what it needs to. If you're looking for a disturbing film that doesn't rely on cheap shocks, excessive gore, or implausible spectacle, something grounded in human failure and regret, I highly recommend The Coffee Table. It's not an easy watch, but it's a haunting one. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about this truly dreadful film. I have never really seen a modern horror that has stuck with me like this one. Pretty much the whole day after I watched this, I was just filled with anxiety and dread. So it's a really good movie. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.